Imagine showing up to work one morning and realizing something feels slightly off. Not dramatic, not obvious, just different. Your manager suddenly avoids eye contact. Slack feels quieter than usual. Half the team calendar is blocked out. Then you notice the meeting request sitting in your inbox. Quick sync. No agenda, no explanation. And deep down, you already know what it means. Because over the last 2 years, millions of workers have learned to fear one thing more than bad performance reviews, more than recessions, maybe even more than outsourcing itself. Artificial intelligence. The new corporate script goes something like this. We're restructuring for the AI era. AI is improving efficiency. And then, somewhere near the bottom of the email, hidden between phrases like strategic realignment and future-focused organization, comes the real message. You're gone. Now, at first glance, this story feels inevitable. Technology changes, jobs disappear. That has always happened. But the deeper you dig into this wave of AI layoffs, the stranger the story becomes. Because if artificial intelligence was truly replacing massive numbers of workers, you would expect the results to be impossible to miss. Productivity should explode. Corporate output should surge. Profits per employee should skyrocket. That's the promise of automation. And yet something strange started happening during the biggest AI layoff wave in modern history. The layoffs came. The fear came. The headlines came. But the economic transformation everyone was promised barely appeared. According to multiple economic studies and later Gartner research, companies aggressively cutting workers during AI rollouts were often seeing little to no measurable improvement in financial performance. In some cases, the numbers barely moved at all. And that creates a deeply uncomfortable question. If the AI revolution wasn't dramatically improving results, then why were so many companies suddenly blaming AI for layoffs in the first place? And once you start asking that question, you begin noticing contradictions everywhere. You realize this may not actually be a story about artificial intelligence replacing workers. It may be a story about corporations discovering the perfect excuse. An excuse that sounds futuristic. An excuse that boosts stock prices. An excuse that makes layoffs feel inevitable instead of chosen. Because we made bad decisions and overhired during the pandemic sounds incompetent. But AI is transforming our industry sounds visionary. And that difference is worth billions. Tonight, we need to talk about one of the biggest corporate scandals quietly unfolding in the modern economy. AI washing. The art of blaming the future for decisions made in the present. And the most unsettling part is this. The AI doesn't even need to work. It just needs to sound believable. There is something almost magical about the word AI. The moment executives say it, ordinary business decisions suddenly become untouchable. Layoffs become innovation. Cost-cutting becomes transformation. Panic becomes strategy. And investors love it. Think about the alternatives companies could use. Option 1. We overhired during the pandemic, and now we need to correct our mistakes. That sounds terrible. The stock drops. Analysts panic. The CEO looks reckless. Option 2. Revenue growth is slowing. Also terrible. That makes investors think the company's best days are behind it. Option 3. Interest rates destroyed cheap money and our business model is struggling. Again, terrible. Now compare all of that to this sentence. We are becoming an AI-first company. Suddenly, the exact same layoffs sound intelligent, forward-looking, inevitable. And that is why researchers have started using the term narrative arbitrage. Companies are trading an embarrassing truth for a profitable fiction. The decision itself stays the same. Only the story changes. And once executives realized how powerful that story was, the floodgates opened. Amazon, Meta, Snap, Block, Microsoft, Google. One after another, major companies began connecting layoffs to AI transformation. Some did it directly, others implied it subtly, but the message was always the same. The machines are coming, and humans are no longer needed. There was just one problem. The productivity explosion never arrived. Because if AI was genuinely replacing massive numbers of workers, you would expect to see something very obvious happen. Productivity should skyrocket, margins should surge, output per employee should explode. That's the entire point of automation. And yet, according to Oxford Economics and later Gartner research, the data wasn't showing anything close to that kind of transformation. In fact, Gartner's 2026 study may have been the most devastating finding of all. They surveyed hundreds of billion-dollar companies actively deploying AI. 80% reported workforce reductions. But those cuts showed almost no correlation with improved financial performance. Think about how insane that is. The layoffs weren't producing the promised gains. The AI wasn't producing the promised gains. And yet the layoffs continued anyway. Which raises a terrifying possibility. What if AI wasn't actually the reason? What if AI was simply the explanation? Here's the detail almost nobody talks about. The layoff wave actually started before the AI boom. That matters enormously, because the public memory of this era goes something like this. ChatGPT appears. AI becomes powerful. Companies panic. Workers get fired. Simple, clean, logical. Except that's not what happened. The large-scale corporate layoffs began accelerating in 2022, before most people had ever touched generative AI, before AI assistants became mainstream, before companies had integrated these systems deeply into everyday workflows. In other words, the cuts were already coming. Mark Andreessen, one of the most powerful investors in Silicon Valley, said this openly. According to him, the real story was much simpler. During the pandemic, companies hired aggressively because money was cheap. Interest rates were near zero. Tech valuations exploded. Growth looked endless. And executives staffed companies as if the boom would last forever. Then reality arrived. Interest rates surged, growth slowed. And suddenly, corporations found themselves massively overstaffed. Andreessen's estimate was brutal.
Essentially, every large company is overstaffed. I think a lot of them are overstaffed by 75%. And now they all have the silver bullet excuse, right? It's AI.
It's AI. That single sentence changes the entire story, because it suggests the layoffs were not created by AI. They were merely rebranded by AI. The correction was already happening. The technology just arrived at the perfect time to absorb the blame. And once you understand that, another strange pattern begins to emerge. Companies became very comfortable talking about AI to investors, but much less comfortable talking about AI to regulators. Which brings us back to New York. Sometimes scandals reveal themselves through leaks, sometimes through whistleblowers, and sometimes through paperwork. In March 2025, New York quietly introduced a requirement into WARN filings, the mandatory legal notices companies submit during mass layoffs. A simple checkbox. Did AI or automation contribute to this layoff? That's it. Nothing dramatic, no political speech, no congressional hearing. Just one tiny box. And for 1 year, the state collected the filings. Then the results came out. 162 companies filed notices. 0 checked the AI box. 0. Now stop and think about what that means. Publicly, executives were everywhere talking about AI transformation. Investor presentations mentioned AI constantly. Press releases framed layoffs around automation and efficiency. And yet when companies had to sign legally binding documents, suddenly the story changed. Now it was economic conditions, restructuring, market pressures. The same companies were effectively telling 2 different stories about the same layoffs. One story for Wall Street, another for regulators. And those stories cannot both be true, because either AI caused the layoffs, or it didn't. And here's the truly important part. Companies had a reason to avoid checking that box. Legal risk. If layoffs are officially tied to automation, companies can face Lawsuits, union pressure, regulatory scrutiny, tax complications, and future employment obligations. So the AI narrative lives in the safest possible place. Press releases, interviews, investor calls, places where the story generates maximum hype with minimum accountability. That gap between what companies say publicly and what they sign legally is where the AI washing scandal truly lives. And once you see it, you start realizing something even darker. Some of the AI systems replacing workers weren't actually AI at all. In 1770, Europe became obsessed with a machine. It was called the mechanical Turk, a wooden automaton dressed like a Turkish chess master. The machine appeared capable of playing chess against humans. And not just casually. It defeated aristocrats, military officers, even Napoleon reportedly played against it. People were stunned. A machine that could think, a machine that could strategize, a machine that behaved almost human. There was just one problem. The robot was fake. Hidden inside the cabinet was a real human chess player secretly controlling every move. The entire performance was an illusion. Now, fast forward 250 years. Because modern AI has recreated the exact same trick. One of the clearest examples came from a startup called Nate. The company raised more than $50 million, promising revolutionary AI-powered shopping automation. The pitch sounded futuristic. Autonomous purchasing, machine intelligence, the future of commerce. Then investigators discovered the truth. Behind the scenes, human workers in the Philippines were manually completing transactions. The AI was largely people clicking buttons. The automation was theater. And Nate is not alone. Another company called Builder.ai became one of the most aggressively marketed AI startups in the world. The company claimed artificial intelligence could build apps almost automatically, dramatically reducing the need for engineers. Investors loved it. Microsoft partnered with them. The company reached valuations approaching $1.5 billion. The branding was pure Silicon Valley fantasy. AI building software, AI replacing expensive human developers, AI democratizing coding itself. But former employees and investigations later painted a very different picture. Behind much of the AI-powered workflow were large teams of human engineers sitting at a desk in a city in India, manually doing work customers believed was being automated. The AI layer was far thinner than the marketing suggested. And suddenly, another terrifying realization hits you. The public fear is not just that AI is replacing workers. It's that companies are pretending AI exists at a level it often doesn't. The future being sold to investors may partially depend on hidden human labor operating behind a digital curtain. This phenomenon now has a name: the mechanical Turk problem. AI that secretly depends on people. And once you realize how much hidden labor exists underneath these systems, another horrifying pattern appears. Many workers are unknowingly training the systems that may eventually replace them. Customer service agents documenting workflows for chatbot systems, writers correcting AI outputs, developers reviewing AI-generated code, editors fixing hallucinations. Every correction improves the model. Every review becomes training data. Workers are effectively acting as unpaid teachers for their own future replacements. And most don't even realize it's happening. There is another reason AI washing is so effective. Fear. Not the fear of machines themselves, the fear of inevitability. Because once workers believe replacement is unavoidable, behavior changes instantly. People stop negotiating harder salaries. They stop asking for promotions. They stop resisting bad management. They stop investing in themselves. Why? Because psychologically, they already feel obsolete. Researchers call this learned helplessness, a condition where repeated exposure to something perceived as uncontrollable causes people to stop fighting back, even when resistance is still possible. And this is where the AI narrative becomes incredibly powerful. Because the belief in replacement can change the labor market before the replacement actually happens. The machine doesn't even need to arrive. The story alone is enough. And meanwhile, something else is happening inside companies. The workers who survived the layoffs often discover that AI did not eliminate the workload. It redistributed it. A 10-person team becomes 6. The remaining employees receive AI tools. Management declares productivity has improved. But in reality, 4 people disappeared. The work stayed. Now fewer humans carry more pressure. Workers across industries report the same things. Burnout, impossible output expectations, always-on monitoring, AI-generated workload expansion. The AI didn't necessarily remove labor. It removed breathing room. And then comes the final insult. Sometimes the AI fails. Customer support collapses. Hallucinations create legal problems. Automated systems frustrate users. And quietly, very quietly, companies begin rehiring humans. Not publicly. No press release saying the AI didn't work. Instead, the humans return invisibly. As contractors, lower pay, fewer benefits, no apology. The public narrative remains, AI replaced workers. The private reality becomes, can you start Monday? Now here's where this story becomes even more dangerous. The AI boom is expensive, very expensive. Tech companies are spending money at a scale that almost sounds fictional. Not millions, not tens of billions, hundreds of billions. Collectively, major technology firms are expected to spend nearly $700 billion on AI infrastructure over the next few years. Data centers, NVIDIA H100 chips, cloud compute, power systems, model training, GPU clusters so large they consume electricity like small cities. And suddenly, another possibility emerges. What if workers are not being fired because AI replaced them, but because companies need cash to pay for the AI race itself? That changes everything. The layoffs become less about automation and more about financing. Humans aren't disappearing because the machines work. Humans are disappearing because the machines are expensive. Meta alone projected AI-related capital expenditure reaching $135 billion. That's an 87% increase year over year. At the same time, the company cut roughly 8,000 workers. Microsoft poured billions into OpenAI while simultaneously launching quiet workforce reductions and buyout programs. Amazon massively expanded AI investment while cutting tens of thousands of roles after pandemic-era overhiring. And this creates one of the cruelest ironies in the modern economy. Workers are being fired to pay for the machines that might someday replace them. Not because the replacement already happened, because the replacement is expensive to build. And remember, according to Gartner, most enterprise AI projects are still failing to deliver the promised returns. Some estimates suggest nearly 70 to 80% of enterprise AI initiatives either underperform or collapse entirely. Only around 28% are currently delivering the ROI executives promised investors. Think about how insane that is. Companies are cutting human labor to fund systems that often do not even work properly yet. And according to Gartner's own research, workforce reductions showed almost no correlation with improved financial performance. In other words, the layoffs aren't even producing the results companies promised. That is one of the most astonishing economic gambles of the modern era. Because eventually, investors stop rewarding narratives. Eventually, they ask for numbers, real productivity, real profits. And if the AI productivity revolution never arrives at the scale promised, then executives may have sacrificed experienced workers, institutional knowledge, trust, morale, and entire careers for a fantasy. A fantasy financed by the people who lost their jobs to fund it. Now, to be fair, some AI disruption is real. Certain jobs will absolutely change. Some roles will disappear. Others will evolve. That part is true. But the certainty with which corporations describe this transition is deeply misleading. Because even experts disagree on what happens next. Some economists believe AI will eventually create more jobs than it destroys. Others believe this technological shift is fundamentally different from every previous one. And that uncertainty matters. Because if the world's top experts cannot predict the outcome confidently, why are corporations speaking with such absolute certainty when firing people? The answer is simple: because certainty is useful. Especially when it protects stock prices. Especially when it shifts blame away from executives. Especially when it transforms painful corporate decisions into acts of technological destiny. And maybe that is the most important thing to understand about AI washing. This is not just a technology story, it's a storytelling story. The real power of AI right now may not be what the machines can do. It may be what corporations can claim the machines will someday do. Your job wasn't replaced by a robot. It may have been replaced by a PowerPoint presentation about a robot. And until regulators, investors, workers, and the public start demanding honest distinctions between genuine automation and corporate narrative management, the incentives will remain exactly the same. Because right now, blaming AI is profitable. It sounds modern. It sounds inevitable. It sounds cleaner than saying, "We wanted fewer people on payroll." And behind all the futuristic language about transformation and innovation, a much older story still exists. Cutting costs, increasing control, doing more with fewer people. The tools changed. The incentives didn't. And maybe the scariest part of this entire story is not that machines are becoming more human. It's that humans are increasingly being treated like machines. If this video changed the way you look at AI headlines, corporate layoffs, or the promises being sold to the public, share it. Because the more people understand the difference between genuine technological progress and corporate narrative management, the harder it becomes to hide behind buzzwords. And if you want more deep investigations into the systems quietly reshaping work, media, and society, subscribe to Intellica. Because the next wave of automation may not just change jobs. It may change the way reality itself is presented to us.